I had a feeling that something was wrong with my wife, Caroline. It was a small feeling, but enough for someone who'd known her for 12 years, 10 of which we'd been married. Caroline and I have a typical Scandinavian family with 2 children, a 7-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl. We live in our own house, not far from the district capital, and we both work full-time. I met Caroline at the town hall, and I work at a small consulting company. My wife and I met at an evening class on advanced Microsoft Excel usage and got married 2 years later. Like most couples, our marriage had its ups and downs, but there were never any serious problems, at least from my point of view. The first signs appeared about a month after our 10-year anniversary. It was a slight decrease. She was still interested in sex, but she started suggesting quickies much more often than making love much more frequently than before. Another subtle but noticeable sign was her increased spending on clothes. Another sign was that she started criticizing me more and more without any real reason. Caroline has always been at least 2 evenings a week with her friends doing various harmless activities. She went to aerobics classes, evening classes, bowling and badminton, but only had a couple of late nights out a year with the girls at a bar or restaurant when someone in the group wanted to celebrate something. I did everything I could but couldn't find any new or strange patterns in her evenings out. My colleague Eric noticed that I was having problems in my marriage and told me that it was better to find. I decided to tell him the truth. I said that I could probably find out who was behind it all, but I couldn't hire a private detective for 2 simple reasons. First, there wasn't one in our town or the entire district. Second, even if there was, I didn't have the money to keep Caroline under surveillance for an extended period. I promised to do everything I could. I was hoping we could resolve the issues between Caroline and me. The last straw was on the first Saturday evening, after Eric suggested I take some action. Caroline and I were invited to a pleasant dinner hosted by friends not far from the city. She was very loving towards me all evening, and even kept it up all the way home in the taxi, which we shared with another couple. I was hoping to continue the evening in a more intimate way, but as soon as the babysitter left, Caroline changed her tone and was quite snappy with me. I decided not to push the matter and replied with a smile. What could I expect from someone who was so distant and uncooperative? We didn't speak about it further that evening, but it was on my mind for several hours. Before I went to sleep, I came up with a plan. I needed to subscribe to an anonymous internet service so I could send emails without being traced. I tested the email service on Sunday morning and sent Caroline the following email at her workplace on Monday. Dear Mrs. Emmon, I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but I have evidence of your infidelity. I'm sorry for your husband and a bit envious of your lover for the pleasure he gets from you, but of course I'm tempted to share this with your husband. I've got a better idea though. I want to have a good time with a wonderful woman like you during my next business trip, so I expect you to be sitting alone at the Plaza Cafe today, Monday, between 2:30 p.m. I'll be there at 2:30 p.m. and 3:00 p.m. My associate will be waiting for you at the table with the envelope. He'll greet you with, "Aren't you Elle's sister?" And you should respond, "No, I'm her sister's friend." After that, you need to hand him the envelope. Thank him for his cooperation and tell him the amount is just €600, which isn't serious blackmail. The police are unlikely to treat it as a priority case to save the reputation of a cheating wife. On the other hand, it was a small enough amount for Caroline to easily withdraw from it at the moment. Both euros and our own chona are available from ATMs outside the main office of our bank. On Monday, I suggested to Eric that we take a 3-hour coffee break at the Plaza Cafe. We entered a few minutes before 3. We went for a coffee at the Plaza Cafe. We got there just before 3 and I was surprised to see Caroline sitting on her own at a table. I was even more surprised to see Martin Jensen sitting on his own a few tables away from her. I didn't realize he also worked at the town hall and that he was married to one of Caroline's best friends. We had dinner with Martin and his wife last Saturday, but I didn't notice anything unusual between him and Caroline. I loudly asked what was going on and why they were there instead of at work. Martin ran off without saying anything to me. Caroline left the cafe right after him. Eric was even more confused than I was when I told him that we had probably caught Caroline with her lover. After that, I called Martin's wife, Cecilia, and asked her if she had any idea why my wife and her husband took the afternoon off and were sitting at different tables. I told her that I thought Caroline was having an affair and that Martin must be involved, unless I got a good explanation of what they were up to. She said she'd have a chat with Martin and call me back once she knew more. Martin was a very handsome man, usually well-dressed and polite. Dressed politely with good manners, and a real party lover, of course. Those of us who knew him from childhood had a very different opinion of him at home. I checked our bank account, where it showed that 600 euros had been withdrawn and then deposited back during the day. That was enough information for me, so I filled out the divorce papers that I had picked up. I went to the courthouse during my lunch break. When Caroline came home, she was furious and lashed out at me. "You acted like an idiot at the cafe. I can explain everything if you just take the time to listen to me." I replied, "I don't want to listen because I don't care about your explanations. Just read these divorce papers and sign them. Everything is split 50/50ths, 0/50, and you won't get a better deal even with a lawyer who would cost you a fortune." She was really angry and shouted at me, saying these divorce papers are the only reasonable thing you've done in a long time. She signed them without reading them, and said it would be a great relief to finally get a real man instead of a worthless loser like you. That's how my marriage ended. Caroline left the house and I didn't care where she went. Later I received a call from Cecilia was in tears when she called. Martin had confessed to having an affair with Caroline. Now he was crying and begging her to forgive him. She said she didn't know what to do and had asked Martin to move out for the next 2 weeks so she could think about their future. I told her that Caroline and I had already signed the divorce papers. One thing was certain. If Caroline considered Martin her new dream man, she could forget about it. But it wasn't my place to tell her that. I moved all of Caroline's clothes to the guest room, which made her furious when she returned home. I couldn't resist telling her that I had informed Cecilia about what I saw at the Plaza Cafe. This news didn't make her any happier. The next day, strange things happened. When Caroline came home after work, she surprised me by saying, "Dear Lars, I'm sorry and I regret everything. I was stressed and said foolish things. I didn't mean it. Can you forgive me for that? You are and always were going to have to work on our relationship. We're adults, and people expect us to be able to resolve our problems. Please tear up those divorce papers we signed yesterday in anger. I promised I'd be a better wife. I'll explain everything about yesterday." I looked her in the eye and said the divorce papers are already in court. "I know everything about Martin and your affair last night. Martin confessed to Cecilia after you left. She called and told me that you, the man I thought you were, is a crying weakling begging for forgiveness. He says you seduced him. That's not the man I thought you were." Caroline sobbed and asked, "Is he? Cecilia told you about Martin and me. That explains why our marriage has been loveless for some time now. I suspected your deceit, but I didn't have any real proof until Martin." Cecilia asked Caroline how she'd managed to get her to sign the divorce papers just hours before Cecilia told her about Martin's confession. Caroline replied that she'd had enough after a sleepless night and decided to divorce Martin. She added that she'd made that decision long before Martin confessed to having an affair with Cecilia. "I wish I could undo everything I did with Martin. Can you give me a second chance and forgive me?" "No, because I will never understand how you could prefer that scoundrel Martin over me and think of him as a real man. I will never forget how you humiliated me since you fell for him. But that pile of garbage will be yours once Cecilia is done with him. You probably didn't know that all their inherited wealth was in the stocks, savings, expensive house and cars, or Cecilia's private property. The only thing Martin owns is a pile of debt, since he bankrupted his business. Now Martin will lose his fancy Rolex and BMW. If those toys impressed you, if you truly love that sniveling bastard, you'll have to support him and his expensive habits." She replied, "I made a terrible mistake and will never understand how I've been so foolish as to be seduced and deceived by that slippery worm. I'd rather be alone for the rest of my life than have anything to do with him." I heard from a source at the town hall that Martin told Caroline to go to hell when she informed him about the signed divorce papers and suggested they become an official couple. That explains why the day after signing the divorce papers, she begged me to forgive her and cancel the divorce. Martin managed to avoid me ever since he saw me at the cafe just 2 days after his confession. A doctor put him on sick leave due to stress and physical issues, as I expected. Cecilia filed for divorce after the Easter break, and Martin never returned to his job at the town hall after being on sick leave for several months. He left town for a new job. Caroline never saw or spoke to each other again. Caroline rented an apartment in a good neighborhood, but she had to wait 3 months before she could move in. We agreed that until then she would stay in our guest room, and that neither of us would start seeing anyone until our divorce was finalized. Despite the cold atmosphere in the house, the arrangement worked better than expected. Then, about 2 months after she filed for divorce, and then something unexpected happened. One Saturday evening, she asked me to keep an important secret about her financial affairs. I promised, and she said, "You've probably heard that someone in our town won the lottery jackpot. I'm the winner. The jackpot is $3 million, which is enough to solve all my problems. We're still married, which is why I have to ask. You want half of it? Well, that's great, but I don't want anything, and I don't expect anything from you. My only suggestion is that you set up funds for the children so they can pay for their education, buy cars and apartments when they grow up, and support them when they get married." She looked at me and said, "Are you sure you won't try to ask for anything?" I said, "Yes. When we lived together, your love was all I needed. But I'm sure that once Martin hears about this, he'll be at your door in no time begging for your forgiveness and asking to be with you again. He'll never find out because you're the only one I've told and you promised to keep it a secret, even though I didn't keep my promises to you. I'm convinced that you're better than I am and will keep yours." That's all that was said on the matter, and everything went on as usual, except that Caroline was out of town the following Thursday and Friday. On Saturday, she asked me if we could have dinner together because she had something to tell me. I agreed, and our children were spending the night at a friend's house. The dinner was excellent, with my favorite food and great wine. So I started to expect some attempt to buy my love. I was curious about how much she thought my love was worth. And how much she was willing to pay for it during the delicious dessert. I said, "I did exactly as you suggested and set up funds for our children." She replied, "You're a good mother. Those funds will greatly benefit them when they grow up." We didn't discuss it further and continued with pleasant, small talk about other everyday things during coffee with cognac after the meal. We ended up on the couch in the living room. She said, "I'm sorry for being foolish and cheap. I ruined our happy family by deceiving and humiliating the best man I've ever known. Today I can't understand how or why I fell for Martin's advances. I regret it and have spent many sleepless nights crying over how incredibly stupid I was. Of course, I know that money can't buy We know that courts often order the offender to pay money to their victim as compensation for the pain and humiliation caused. However, since no court in this country cares about what I did to you, I took matters into my own hands. I acted as both prosecutor and judge, and I've ruled that all the remaining lottery money after setting up the funds for our children is to be transferred. To your personal account, what I've done cannot be undone." She handed me the bank receipts, and I was silent for a long time before I finally said, "Oh my God, what have you done?" "I can't take your money. I'll return it to you." "You don't need to return anything to me," she replied. "The lawyers who arranged this said it's impossible because there are no conditions attached. The money is yours and only yours. I can't and won't regret what I've done with it. I don't expect or ask for anything in return. I did what I should have done before I got caught up in that foolish affair. Should we try to stay that way? My love wasn't for sale. There were no conditions or requests for forgiveness. She only spoke of it because I hope you're still the same person you were before Martin. That Caroline was a lot for me. You'll never regret this." Caroline was a smart, beautiful woman. She was definitely still in love with me that night. I did everything I could to find a woman like her, and she did the same for me. We probably won't find love like our wedding night again for a long time. We didn't behave like newlyweds, but why not give it a serious try? We called off the divorce, and I decided to give our relationship another chance. And it's going well. We're still married, and we've even had children together. We promised each other that we'd never try to divorce again. I'm not really concerned with the details, even though she gave me a hard time. It felt like she was back because we were realizing how much we loved each other. Only time will tell if. I really think she made the right choice. I pray every night that one day you will forgive me and give me a second chance. I missed her so much that I probably would have done something to get her back. We still don't have the money, but one thing is certain. I love Caroline and she loves me. Thanks for listening. See you in the next episode of Cheating Secrets. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Bye.